Hello there. We are going to conclude day 2 coverage of the Skilling Open, and we are going to do so by looking at the game between the former Minister of Defense, Sergey Karjakin. I say that jokingly, former. He was often nicknamed the Minister of Defense because of his tremendous defensive abilities. And, well, he's playing against Magnus Carlsen, and not long ago they played a hard-fought World Championship match where, Karjakin gave Carlsen all that he could handle, but Carlsen in the end prevailed after the tie breaks. But a very tough matchup for Magnus. But Karjakin since then hasn't really regained his form from then, and in this tournament he has not been doing well, and in fact I think it's going to be really tough for him to advance to the quarterfinals, the top 8, but he has an outside chance, and to do so he kind of has to win this game. So let's see what happens here in round 10. Karjakin with white, e4, e5, knight f3, and in the World Championship match you saw a lot of knight c6, bishop b5, the Berlin, but looks like Carlsen is out for sidelines in this tournament, as we've already seen with his sideline against Giri in the Sicilian and the 8-6 lines in the Queen's Gambit. And here he goes for the Philidor, and he takes on d4. Not a very common guest at the top level, but played from time to time. The downside of Black's position is of course that it can't be a little bit passive. It's solid but passive. White has his pawn in the center, so he keeps a space advantage because Black is a little bit cramped on his first 3 ranks. So we have castles by Magnus, bishop d2, rook e8, and fairly normal moves here. Karjakin castles, bishop f8, putting some pressure on e4, although there's nothing yet. And the bishop will more often than not reroute itself to g7. And Black will just try to stay solid, play moves like c6, put then the other knight on c5, and hope to have a solid position. h3, trying to restrict Black's pieces, knight b to d7, but also preparing now to play the move g4. This is a very active way to handle White's position, sort of like an extended fianchetto. And very often White will push the pawns, and he will put a knight on g3 to fortify e4, and White is ready with some aggressive intentions. Let's see what happened. Knight c5, attacking the pawn on e4 now. So White has to defend it. c6, cutting away some squares, especially d5 square. But now g5 by Karjakin, grabbing the space on the king side. So Black is a little bit cramped, but still solid. f4, a5. Black wants to cement this knight. In some cases it could be pushed away with b4, so this prevents that. Bishop to e3, queen c7, a4, just stopping any ideas of Black getting counterplay on the queen side. Knight a6, queen d2, and we see that White has some nice space because of his pawns here on the king side, and he has finished development and centralized the rooks, so we can say that White stands better, but Black is solid. The downside of Black's position, of course, is that he has much less space, so especially the bishops lack kind of any purpose, to be honest. Bishop d7, at least connecting the rooks, but I'm not sure what role the bishop will play there on d7. Karjakin now goes on and reroutes the knight. Very often bishop d7 is simply played to just allow the rook to come here, and sometimes even the bishop just goes back just to develop the rooks. Rook 8 d8 is indeed played, knight g3, but this time Magnus plays queen c8, and the idea here is simply to line up against the pawn. White could potentially play f5, but he played king h2 here, protecting the pawn. And now Magnus decided enough is enough. He has to go for some kind of counterplay, and he plays d5 here. And the Minister of Defense figures that it's too dangerous to take on d5. It would open up you know all the lines for the black rooks, especially this one eyeing up and lining up against the queen. So instead of taking on d5, when black gets some activity, also the a4 pawn would hang, so black wouldn't really lose a pawn. So Karjakin decides to close it up with e5. The knight now jumps into b4, trying to get some activity. Queen f2, and well, first of all we hit this guy, so black has to protect it. b6, bishop d4 now, and it's clear that black is setting up for f5. Excuse me, white. So the bishop on d4, we play that to protect the pawn, so we can play f5, trying to grab all the space. Magnus can't allow that, so he has to play here bishop f5, which he does. But this also gives white the option of grabbing the bishop pair by taking on f5. He doesn't do it yet. First he covers the pawn. This is under attack by the bishop and the knight, so rook e2, covering the weakness. Magnus tries to fortify, and now Karjakin takes. Bishop couldn't really go away because of the threat of f5, so now we can simply take the bishop. And because we covered the c2 pawn, we now have a free move. So h4 by Karjakin, eyeing up the black queen, which doesn't have a lot of squares, so bishop h3 is a huge threat. Now the position is tough. Again, if you move the queen away, white can play bishop h3, f5, and the attack very quickly becomes overwhelming. So I think Magnus had to take a decision here, and it might be the correct one, but the position is very tough, and just shows how difficult this opening is. I mean, black just struggles to find play because of the activity and space that white has. So here c5 by Magnus. He's going to win a piece after d4, but of course the queen is trapped. Bishop h3, no squares for the queen. Magnus saw that, but figured this was his best chance. He now took on e3 and queen g3, protecting everything, and now the queen doesn't have a square. We can take the e3 pawn later. Queen takes c2, rook takes c2, and knight takes c2. So what does Magnus have for the queen? He has a rook and a knight, and the pawn on e3 for the time being at least. So technically the material is equal, but f5 now played by Karjakin, and rook d2. But here, computer thinks that position might have been around equal if knight e to d4, but now Magnus runs into some difficulties, and e2 is actually a pretty bad move, and maybe Magnus missed something because white will simply take this pawn. Knight takes e2, and well, the position just falls apart. Magnus took on e2, and now Karjakin simply took on e6, and then he will set up a double attack on the f-file, queen to f3, hitting the rook and the pawn. The pawn will be taken with checkmate on the next move, so Magnus has to give up the rook. So now he has only two pieces for the queen, which is simply not enough, and we can rather quickly play through the moves here. Knight c4, queen e8, rook e4, and here we have the trade of rooks. So Magnus has a slight chance here, and that chance is connected with setting up a fortress. I will point you to a video that I made about such a fortress, a very instructive video on the endgame. Do check it out if you're interested in improving your chess. Very good knowledge that you will get from that video about a certain fortress. But okay, on with this game. Queen takes e4. Karjakin is simply going to pick up the pawns. And first he plays g6 though, and this is a big threat here. We have to do something about it. Magnus takes on g6 once. We can't allow queen takes f7, so knight e6. And now a nice move, queen d5. And it's simply zugzwang for Magnus. He plays a4, but now queen to f5. And the problem is you can never take this because the queen is hitting the knight. Once you lose the knight, it's completely lights out. So Magnus tries 98, but queen b7, and the knight is lost. No squares for the knight, it's completely dominated. You can go back, but then I simply take on f7. So Magnus resigned. Yeah, his second loss in the tournament. But nonetheless, after day 2, he's doing pretty good, sitting in second place. Yeah, accidentally said that he was half a point behind Anish in round 9, my round 9 video, but they were actually tight. So Anish Giri leads after 2 days with 6.5. Liren, Magnus Carlsen, Wesley So with 6 points, quiet 6 points but from Wesley, but very solid. Then we have Nakamura, Nepomniachtchi, and Vachier-Lagrave, and fighting for the last spot on the bubble, Alireza, Teimour Radjabov, and Antón, who, well, failed to follow up after a good day 1, but he's still in with a chance because of day 1. But day 3 will decide things, and I think even Karjakin, Aronian, and Quang Liêm have some chances with a great day 3, but yeah, the fight for the last spot will be tremendous. Before we leave you, we have to get the cap score. So let's actually get that. Here we have it. There you go. So a pretty good game. 96.6 for Karjakin, 95.4 for Carlsen. You would expect 97, 98% from these guys. But as you can see from the graph, and I think it has mostly to do with the opening. I mean, White just does keep this edge, you know, right at the start. And yeah, despite some bumps, gradually White's position and then grip on the position got bigger until he won the queen, and especially after e2, then it just, you know, shut up, and was lights out for Magnus, who had two mistakes, actually 3 mistakes, 2 mistakes for Karjakin, but Magnus's mistakes at the end of the day were much bigger and from a more difficult position, so that magnifies, get it. Okay, this concludes day 2 coverage, and now actually day 3 is starting, so I'm gonna check that out and hope to see you with some videos from day 3 as well. See you then.